delivered by the private sector. Our goal is really to work with others here in DC to provide a unified and proactive voice as we advocate for the program. We've gone through 3 strategic planning sessions within CIRB over the years, and we've really identified 4 strategic pillars that you can see below, and that's sort of the foundation for all of the policy work and the communications work that Sarah Hubbard and myself are going to go through in the coming hour. So with that, I thought we'd start by talking a little bit about crop insurance and the Farm Bill. We knew going into this bill that we were going to really face attacks from 3 different areas. The first was going to be cuts to premium assistance. In particular, those opponents of crop insurance really honed in on the harvest price option this go-round. Also, means testing is consistently something we hear from crop insurance opposers, as well as cuts to the private sector delivery system. Digging into each of those a little bit more, and to sort of frame that discussion a little bit, the cuts to premium assistance, we really spent this Farm Bill talking about those cuts as essentially Congress doing nothing more than increasing costs to farmers. And of course, given the current farm environment, given the current economic environment in the countryside, we really posed this as a particularly poor time to make the decision to make crop insurance more expensive for farmers. And of course, by increasing the cost, all you're doing is decreasing the ability of farmers to buy up, which of course makes them more susceptible to disasters and increases calls for ad hoc disaster assistance. The second challenge that we really faced this go-round was on means testing. And means testing comes in a couple of different forms, or we've seen it raised in a couple of different forms. One is adjusted gross income caps. The other is putting a premium assistance cap on farmers. But essentially, we framed that discussion as kicking farmers out of the crop insurance program. We also spent a lot of time here in D.C. trying to explain to folks on the Hill what actuarial sound risk pool means. Risk pools, they're not sort of everyday vocabulary for most congressional staffers. Explaining actuarial soundness within those risk pools is significantly different from Title I farm programs, which is sort of the foundation of knowledge that most congressional staffers have. We also spent a lot of time talking about who would really be impacted by those means tests. Our opponents focused in on the fact that very few farms would likely be impacted by those kinds of changes to law. However, as we all know, some of those larger farms control or farm a large number of the acreage in this country. And that's really what's going to determine actuarial soundness, or the number of acres, not the number of farmers impacted. So we really had to hone our messaging around actuarial soundness and risk pools. And quite frankly, this is where we spent a lot of our time, just because this is where the most education was necessary. Moving on to the third type of challenge we faced, it was cuts to private sector delivery. And of course, unlike a lot of other farm programs, Title I farm programs, the entire risk of crop insurance isn't borne by the federal government. The private sector companies, all of you on the phone, help to bear that risk. What we saw during this Farm Bill was attacks on 2 fronts. One was really to cut the administrative and operating funding that goes to companies for delivering the program, and the second was to cut the target rate of return for crop insurance companies. And of course, what we had to explain time and time again is the target rate of return for crop insurance companies is neither a guarantee nor is it a floor on what companies can earn. We really had to explain the variability that companies face year in and year out in terms of what they could earn from those crop insurance policies. The challenges were real during this Farm Bill. We have folks both on the right and on the left that were asking for changes to the program that would have harmed the program. Of course, on the left, the Environmental Working Group was sort of the poster child and often leading the charge against crop insurance, but if you look to the right, we had the Heritage Foundation as well. What we saw during this Farm Bill that we didn't see as much during the last Farm Bill is we actually saw coordination between these groups on the right and the left to try to work together in their efforts to make cuts to crop insurance. This opposition often translated into legislation. We saw a multitude of bills dropped this Congress that would have made cuts to crop insurance. The AFFIRM Act is the one we sort of refer to as the everything in the kitchen sink, and all of those items that I talked about before, from means testing to cutting private sector delivery to cutting premium discounts, it was all included in this bill and would have cut about $30 billion out of the crop insurance program. In the House, this was led by Congressman Blumenauer from Oregon, but there was an identical bill introduced in the Senate led by folks like Senator Flake and Senator Shaheen from New Hampshire. So this was an example of sort of the real challenge we were facing as we headed into this Farm Bill. One of the other things that made this Farm Bill a little bit more challenging was all the new faces we have in Congress. So keep in mind that the core of crop insurance as it is today really came out of the Ag Risk Protection Act in 2000. And then it was a very conscious debate and discussion by members of Congress about whether they wanted to continue down the path of ad hoc disaster assistance for farmers, knowing that it was unreliable, it was off budget, it often didn't reach farmers in time, or whether Congress wanted to move in a new direction, namely towards crop insurance that was sort of reliable for farmers, got them assistance in time, but also was a partnership between the private sector, the public sector, with farmers paying in as well. And the decision, of course, was made in 2000 that we wanted to move away from ad hoc disaster and towards crop insurance program. The problem is that we really only have 4 members of the House Ag Committee that were around in 2000 for that discussion and remember all of the debate that occurred around that issue. In the Senate, only 3 Senate Ag Committee members. And if you look overall at the House of Representatives, there are only 100 of the 435 members that were around in 2000. So the bottom line here is that we had a lot of educating to do. And a lot of historical education to do to walk folks through why we have crop insurance and why it's set up the way it is today. So the good news is we had a lot of help in working to defend the program during this Farm Bill. CIRB has worked diligently over the last several years to really build up a crop insurance coalition that cuts across all sectors. So it doesn't just include those involved in private sector delivery, but it includes farm organizations and lending organizations, conservation groups, other ag input organizations, to try to be sure that everybody's on the same message and pushing in the same direction, particularly when we have really big issues like the Farm Bill coming forward. We also, of course, have wonderful advocates in Congress. We really couldn't ask for better champions than Chairman Roberts, Ranking Member Stabenow, Chairman Conaway, and Ranking Member Peterson. We have 4 folks at the helm of the agriculture committees that really believe in crop insurance and want to support the program moving forward. So how did all of these dynamics sort of play out in the Farm Bill? Some of this is going to be a review of things you already know, so I'm going to try to go through it here pretty quickly. In terms of the House Farm Bill, we had about a dozen amendments filed that would have harmed crop insurance. However, we only ended up having to do a vote on one of those amendments. It was an amendment by Congressman McClintock out of California, and it was, quite frankly, the most drastic and draconian of the amendments that existed. The amendment would have essentially gutted the farm safety net. It would have eliminated Title I farm programs, the sugar program, dairy programs, and eliminated crop insurance by 2023. Thankfully, it was such a draconian amendment that we were able to beat it back and beat it back very handily. You can see the vote count down below. We still did lose 34 Republicans on that amendment, believe it or not. 12 of those folks were Freedom Caucus members, but it was a really solid vote in support of crop insurance. Of course, then we still had to get through final passage of the House Farm Bill. We always knew this was going to be a tight vote. Politics around the nutrition title of the Farm Bill essentially led to a situation where we were going to have no Democrats voting for final passage of this bill, and quite frankly, no Democrats voting for the majority of the amendments that went through the process. So on the first vote of the House Farm Bill on May 18th, the Farm Bill actually failed by a vote of 198 to 213. In large part because Freedom Caucus members and the Republican Party said they were not going to vote for the bill because they wanted to see some votes on immigration policy first. So they did get those votes on immigration policy. We did a do-over on June 21st on final passage of that exact same Farm Bill, and it made it across the finish line this time sort of by the hair of its chinny chin chin, by a vote of 213 to 211. If you take a look at the Senate side, the amendment that we were most worried about was an amendment that would have instituted adjusted gross income caps on crop insurance. Specifically, Durbin and Grassley introduced this amendment. The cap they put in place was $700,000, and above that $700,000 threshold, you would have gotten a 15 percentage point decrease and the premium discount you receive. This was particularly concerning to us because of course, we faced this exact same issue in 2012, and we lost that vote by 66 to 33. We got a do-over on it in 2013 and lost it again. It was also a troubling amendment for us to fight because it didn't really fall along rural versus urban lines or along Republican versus Democrat lines. If you look at the vote from the 2013 Farm Bill, we lost Republican senators in states like Alabama and Texas, Indiana, and Iowa. But yet at the same time, folks from New Hampshire and Massachusetts and Hawaii voted with us. So it's a really tough amendment to predict votes on. There's a lot less structure in the Senate around what amendments are going to receive votes. So we really came down to the wire on this one. Senator Durbin was pushing hard for a vote. We had received notice from Democrat staff that the amendment was going to receive a vote within the next 2 hours, only at the last minute to have that pulled back. Senator Durbin cut a deal with leadership to avoid a vote on this particular amendment, and quite frankly, we were glad to avoid that vote. In terms of final passage in the Senate, very different picture than what we saw in the House. This was a very bipartisan effort. It was from start to finish. The Farm Bill received 86 votes at the end of the day. It's important to note that that's a veto-proof margin, and it's also one of the largest margins of passage for a Senate Farm Bill. So from there, we move into conference. Both the House and the Senate had to appoint conferees to work out the differences between the House and Senate Farm Bills. In the House, I just throw this list up here so you can see all of the whopping 47 members that the House appointed as conferees. And then on the Senate side, we had 9 folks appointed to the conference. The conference held their first meeting on September 5th. Essentially, it was just an opportunity for all of these 56 members over the course of 3 hours to give 3 minutes worth of comments on what their priorities were going to be as they worked the bill through conference. In reality, however, it's quite frankly just the big four in the room, Stabenow, Roberts, Conaway, and Peterson. These conferees are not really in the room helping work out these issues. Staff has been doing a lot of work behind the scenes since the conferees were appointed at the end of July, but they've run into some roadblocks, and it just doesn't look like they're going to get the bill done in time for the September 30th deadline. We only have 3 days before September 30th now, and there's no deal cut. Just a couple of other numbers to keep in mind. We only have 11 days where they're supposed to be in session before the election, and that's questionable. It's unclear whether or not the House for sure is going to let members go before then. And we only have 27 days in session before the end of the year, December 31st. One of the things that's really keeping pressure on members to get a farm bill done is the state of the farm economy. This slide just shows some of the tariff announcements that have been made and what has happened to corn and soybean prices as those announcements have occurred. And of course, the administration has announced $12 billion in trade aid to farmers in the meantime. So this situation on the countryside and the need for farmers to have some sort of certainty is keeping the pressure on this Congress to actually get the Farm Bill done. So what's the holdup? It's a couple of different things. On the one hand, there continues to be a very strong political debate over the nutrition title. That debate on the House side got very personal between Peterson and Conaway, between Republicans and Democrats. A lot of hurt feelings, bruised egos along the way, but this political debate has not gone away in conference, and the House and the Senate are really on very different sides. But it's not just all about the politics. There's also some policy differences that are pretty complicated and are going to have to be worked out. For example, if you take a look at the conservation title, the approaches taken by the House and the Senate were completely different as they wrote their conservation titles. And this chart just sort of gives you an idea of how much difference there is. You can tell just by the funding levels what priorities were and how different the priorities were between the House and the Senate. So what about crop insurance in conference? So we came away in both the House and the Senate bill without any major cuts to crop insurance. But there are a couple of small provisions that we are going to be keeping an eye on as this process moves forward. One example of that is additional agent compensation incentives to agents who sell whole farm revenue policies. IT funding for RMA was an issue that was left unresolved in both farm bills. Risk management education funding, also big differences between the House and the Senate. And then one theme we saw continuously in the debate over both bills was this intersection between crop insurance and conservation. So it showed itself more in the Senate bill, but during conference they're going to have to work out issues on what constitutes good farming practices. Conservation practices get included in that. Should performance-based discounts be allowed if farmers undertake certain conservation practices? And then, of course, what sort of data collection and analysis should be done on where crop insurance and conservation sort of meet in the middle? And then, of course, there's going to be a debate on hemp because that's always a fun one to throw in there as well. So what happens if we miss this September 30th deadline, or probably more appropriately spoken, when we miss the September 30th deadline? A short-term extension is always a possibility. The Senate has indicated that they aren't inclined to move towards an extension. So if there is no extension, fear not. Crop insurance continues. It's permanent law. There will be no impact on crop insurance. Some of the other programs don't quite fare as well. Some of them can continue on without any significant changes for a couple of months. Some of them aren't going to be able to renew contracts without an extension or without a permanent farm bill. But realistically, you have a couple of months of leeway if you don't do an extension. But come December 31st, there's a pretty hard cliff on dairy policy and, quite frankly, on all other Title I farm policy. One of the things about permanent law is that it's meant to be a hammer to encourage Congress to get a farm bill done and get it done in a timely manner, because if it doesn't get done, farm policy reverts back to what I would refer to as the Stone Age of farm policy. It reverts back to the farm policies we had in the 1930s and the 1940s. It involves things like parity pricing and production controls And it doesn't even include all of the commodities that are covered by farm programs today. For example, under permanent law, soybeans has absolutely no farm safety net. Again, that's just Title I. That doesn't count for crop insurance. But the bottom line is that absolutely no one wants to see a reversion back to permanent law. So even though we might not see an extension today, by the first of the year, if we don't have a farm bill worked out by then, we will see some sort of extension legislation by the end of the year. At this point in time, before I hand it over to Sarah, I thought it might be a good opportunity to address any questions that folks have now on farm bill issues and what's sort of going on in D.C. right now. So does anybody have any questions they want addressed before we move on? All right. Sounds great. I'm going to hand it over to Sarah Hubbard now.
And there will be plenty of time for questions later, so keep brainstorming, and we'll visit about that at the end. Hey, everybody, this is Sarah. We wanted to start with a quick overview of CIRB's overall communication strategy. Our communications are a critical component of our advocacy work. It really goes hand in hand with the policy strategy that Tara just talked through as we headed into the Farm Bill. So CIRB works to engage with three key audiences about our policy goals. First, I'll start with grassroots. So that includes engagement with all of you, CIRB's members, as well as our coalition partners. We do that through our ongoing communications via newsletter and calls like this, but we also have a Legislative Action Center built into CIRB's website that I hope that you've already used, but if not, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. That makes it really easy for CIRB members to log in when we are fighting a specific threat on the Hill or a negative amendment, and it connects you with your member of Congress so that you can easily have a turnkey message that you're able to share with them. We're also really excited to have our newest Emerging Leaders Program class on board. The ELP folks have been a critical component of our communications engagement. We really appreciate all of your work to, one, communicate internally within your companies about CIRB's work, sharing that within your communities when you're making in-district visits with your members of Congress, and of course, engaging on social media as well. So grassroots are a very important part of our overall communications efforts. Secondly, Tara mentioned the diverse coalition that CIRB has worked to build over the past several years. They're really integral to our work on the Hill. Our communications with the coalition have increased over time to engage with both their policy teams as well as their communications staff as well. We're really focused on promoting a unified message so that all of these various organizations, while they might come at it from a slightly different angle, the core message becomes an echo chamber, which is really helpful when we are educating all of the new folks on the Hill, like Tara mentioned, or heading into a specific fight. It's also been very helpful for them just to have an increased awareness of CIRB's members, our work, and new ways for us to work together in the future. Collaboration is a huge focus of CIRB, and so we're always looking for new ways that we can work with certainly our members, but also our coalition partners. And I'll mention and delve into our ongoing social media campaign, which has been one aspect of our collaboration with these groups. Another has certainly been all of the direct outreach that we've done with various organizations in the coalition to really continue to serve as an information source to various audiences around the country. And then finally, of course, media. We strive for CIRB to be the go-to source of crop insurance policy information for agriculture policy media. Our outreach to media is targeted, and it does have that DC policy focus. We coordinate with other crop insurance groups as well to, again, have that unified voice for the industry. We do direct targeted media outreach and interviews as issues come up, and we would welcome if you ever have questions or identify an opportunity for media engagement, please think of us as a resource as well. So overall, these audiences and our overall communication strategy reinforces our core pillars that Tara mentioned as well, of serving as the capital voice here in DC for the crop insurance and reinsurance industries, and being a credible, reliable information source. One of those ways that we do serve as an information source is social media. And as you all know, social media has grown in importance for policymakers and organizations seeking to have a voice in DC. Thinking back to 2015, during the budget debate that we were all engaged in, I think that was probably the first time that we saw crop insurance really discussed on social media, believe it or not. But it was clear that there was a void to fill, and we didn't just want our detractors to fill it. We knew, like Tara mentioned, that there are active organizations from both the left and the right that had opinions about crop insurance and weren't shy about sharing them. But we also knew that we had facts on our side, and we wanted to make sure that we were using every opportunity to share our resources. So more and more we know that social media is a news source. It's a way that you can stay up to date on issues that matter most. I think most of you are probably familiar with our social media campaign, and I hope that you're already signed up on Twitter. But if not, I would encourage you to log in, take a look around, search for crop insurance or other issues that are important to you, and you'll see that more people, including more members of Congress and their staff, are using it to collect input from their constituents, engage directly, and really just stay informed about what's happening in the news. We believe that social media is another important tool in our toolbox of advocacy. It definitely doesn't replace traditional media or our other tactics, but we have found it to be a pretty low-cost, high-reward way to help give crop insurance more profile. So I mentioned our social media campaign, but as a refresher, back in January 2017, CIRB launched the now award-winning #ProtectCropInsurance campaign. I hope that you're already receiving these, but if not, please let us know. But this ongoing tool is shared weekly with both CIRB members and our crop insurance coalition partners to provide turnkey content to help build a steady drumbeat of positive messaging about crop insurance online, especially targeting decision makers in DC. These toolkits are based on a resource guide that CIRB helped develop, and every week we tackle a different topic, or in some cases, a different state and the role that crop insurance plays in that state. So the content's always changing, and we're always looking for fresh news clips, interviews, audio, videos, positive ways to highlight crop insurance. So I would welcome any information that you all have that you think would be a good fit for a future toolkit. Please don't be shy in sharing that with our team as well. And all of these resources are available on CIRB's website. I mentioned award-winning because in June of this year, the Ag Relations Council awarded CIRB as a winner in the social media tactic category for this ongoing campaign. We were really excited for CIRB to receive this recognition among other peers in the ag industry. And we think that it's a good indicator that it's been a positive effort and a good investment of time. So we're going to be continuing this project moving forward. Through 2017, this effort resulted in a potential reach of over 440,000 Twitter users. And that's all been thanks to all of you who have been engaged and have used these resources and shared them within your networks. Everything really helps, and it takes all of us working together. So thank you so much for that. So as Tara recapped, there were a lot of things happening heading into this Farm Bill that reinforced that we wanted to get creative in how we communicated CIRB's priorities. And we wanted to think about some new tactics and new ways to really maximize our influence. So building on the past success of the Protect Crop Insurance campaign, we brainstormed some new ways to really get our information out there. And our goal was to have CIRB's resources and information be the first thing that Hill staff and DC media found when they went looking online for information about crop insurance as they headed into a potential vote on an amendment or as they were really delving into the details of the Farm Bill. So here's a snapshot of some of the tactics that CIRB used in May 2018 alone. So to start the month, we launched a Google ad targeting Capitol Hill zip codes during office hours that directed users to CIRB's broad coalition letter that was signed by national organizations highlighting the important role of crop insurance. Along with that Google ad, we also set up ads on Twitter opposing harmful Farm Bill amendments. Those ads were kind of evolved over time as the threats changed as well. So it was great that we were able to be responsive as the situation changed. We also coordinated the first ever crop insurance thunderclap, which is highlighted over there in the right-hand corner. Basically, the thunderclap is a way for supporters to log in with their Twitter accounts, sign up on this online petition, and once our goal was reached of having 100 supporters sign up, then our message was sent out all at the same time across all supporters' accounts. That was a way to make a larger splash, and we reached up to 304,000 people. The coalition was very engaged throughout the Farm Bill process as well. We had a broad petition letter in support of crop insurance signed by 418 national, state, and local organizations and individual companies. It was shared with the full House of Representatives in advance of Farm Bill consideration. That was a strong showing. I think it was the first time that we had done such a broad coalition letter, and I think it did a great job of showcasing the coalition's diversity as well. Later in May, we sent a CIRB member action alert that utilized that Legislative Action Center I mentioned earlier, opposing the McClintock Amendment. We ultimately had almost 360 letters sent to 68 representatives from CIRB member company employees. So thank you all who responded to that call to action and contacted your member of Congress at that time. It really makes a difference. We also posted a Twitter call to action video. You'll see Tara in the bottom right-hand corner there, urging opposition to that amendment. And that had nearly 1,000 views. It was pretty popular in Twitter, Tara. But again, looking for other ways to keep the profile of all of the work that you all were doing and the role of the coalition and the need to be engaged front and center. We engaged with the media throughout this entire process as well. Looking ahead to the next month, it was a pretty busy summer around here. In June, we updated our Twitter ads, again responding to how the Farm Bill process changed over time. We shared a social media toolkit that was focused on the Senate Farm Bill's markup in committee and updated that as well once the Farm Bill went to the Senate floor. Later in June, we continued to gather signatures to that broad coalition letter that I mentioned, and ultimately we had 639 national, state, and local organizations sign on to that final version of the letter, which we were all very excited about. Again, pretty new endeavor for the crop insurance industry to have such a broad letter of support sent to the Hill. That was something that we were able to leverage in future social media ads, and then we were able to direct users who saw that ad back to the coalition letter and in an accompanying graphic that showed the presence of the organizations that signed on in each state, which I think was very impactful. Again, we set up an action alert as we went into Senate floor consideration of the Farm Bill, and we anticipated a negative amendment. CIRB member companies once again engaged, and we appreciate everyone's quick action. It went down to the wire since we weren't sure what amendment we might ultimately face, but we definitely had a positive outcome, and I felt like we were all very prepared heading into that vote. Throughout all of this, we worked hard to stay in communication with you, CIRB member companies, and coalition partners, and I think that coordination was really critical throughout this process, and it's continued on even throughout the Farm Bill conference process as well. So, what was the result of all of this time and effort and energy? Well, as you can see, there was a lot of action over the last several months and a lot of communication that happened. I have to say thank you one more time to everybody who's participated either in the ongoing Protect Crop Insurance campaign or has engaged to connect with your member of Congress through CIRB's Legislative Action Center. We've had a substantial amount of contacts made throughout this Farm Bill process. So I mentioned, over 1,000 email contacts reaching 135 members of Congress by CIRB member companies. More than 100 supporters participating in our inaugural Thunderclap event on social media. Google ads that leveraged CIRB's information and our coalition letter online for those Hill staff or others located in D.C. who were looking for information about crop insurance during that critical time, as well as our other online ads, which was a first for us to really set up different social media ads trying to target those users. Overall, though, this supports our policy goal that Tara discussed, and I think it just reinforces the need to continue to be creative and think of new tactics and new ways to keep this positive story about crop insurance front and center, and we as your CIRB staff will continue to do that, and we will welcome your input too if you have thoughts, ideas, or ways that you think that we can continue to build on this success. One way that we are going to make some changes is through a new update to CIRB's website, which we're all very excited about. CIRB's website is a few years old at this point, so we're currently undergoing a redesign to make it a little bit easier to navigate for CIRB members and coalition partners so that CIRB's resources can be utilized even more broadly. But to recap where things stand right now, if you go onto cropinsurance.org, the homepage is where you'll find news, current action alerts, engagement opportunities, upcoming events. The Legislative Action Center is where you'll be able to access our grassroots engagement tool. It's also currently where the myths and facts and state profile resources are housed. On events, we keep that updated with information about our annual meeting and fly-in details. And the newsroom, that's where our press releases are posted, archives of our weekly newsletter, and staff presentations. And finally, the Emerging Leaders Program tab includes information about our current class and application information for future years. So on that note, I'll turn it back over to Carrie Lynch, who will wrap things up with an update on membership engagement.
Thanks, Sarah. So moving to membership engagement, we first all want to thank you for your continued support as CIRB members and your active involvement in the association. We strive to communicate our work and news from here in DC effectively through a range of publications. I hope you all receive our newsletters, federal affairs updates, and achievements pieces. We encourage you to share these CIRB member publications with others, and if you do have anyone in your company that needs to get added to our list, please let us know. As Sarah mentioned, the remodel of our website, we are hoping to update it and make it easier for all of you to access our webinars, resources like the myths versus fact sheets, and our other press releases and news. We're also gearing up for our annual meeting in February, so I hope you all have your calendars marked, and we're going to be sending out our save the dates for our annual meeting shortly with those details on the screen. You can see our annual meeting will be held February 13th through 15th at the San Diego Manchester Grand Hyatt. So please stay tuned for more details on this, because we all look forward to seeing you at our annual meeting. With that, I believe we can wrap it up here and want to thank you again for your time today. We're happy to answer any questions on this, or you can always contact us later when we're in the office. This is your CIRB staff, and we are here to help you. If you just want to type your questions in the chat box, and we'll take any questions now.
The good news is that you know how to track us down, too, if you have any questions later.
And Jim Constanti, it popped up earlier that you had a question, but then it didn't show up in the attendee chat. So I have a feeling you have one if you want to retype it.
Look in presenter chat. Middle.
Jim, I think we're going to have to oh, there we go. Now the questions are coming up. There was just a delay. Sorry about that, guys. If you had to put a percentage chance on Farm Bill passage in 2018, what would it be? This is Tara. I would not want anybody else to get attributed to my Magic 8-Ball prediction. I'm still confident we're going to get a Farm Bill done in 2018. I just think it's going to be after the election is over, and of course the election and the results of the election could really change the political dynamic and the leverage that each side has as we sort of get to a finish line. But I do think the farm economy is in a place where folks are going to feel like it's important to get it done before we head into the new year. And I don't think, quite frankly, that getting a straight-up extension is going to be any easier than getting an actual new bill passed. So I'm pretty hopeful that we're still going to get one done this year.
The next question is, has Grassley's amendment gained traction in committee?
So the Grassley Flake amendment on adjusted gross income did not actually come up in the Senate Ag Committee when they did their markup. It was introduced strictly as a floor amendment. Grassley would not have had support for that kind of amendment in the committee to run it through committee. And we feel pretty confident about where our committee folks are on that kind of amendment. It's really just a floor issue for us where it gets difficult. Will there be a fly-in this November? I'm going to let Carrie handle that one.
So we are not having our traditional fall fly-in this November. We are having a fly-in for all of our ELPs, which is kind of new to the ELP process. But since it's election time here in DC, we're not going to be having our traditional fall fly-in. But we hope to see you all at the April fly-in this spring, and we will get those dates out. It's April 2nd through the 4th. Thank you, Megan.
And next year, we will do a fall fly-in. We try to do a fall fly-in in the off years when we don't have an election. But because there's just no one in town on election years, we don't bring you guys back during election years. So.
Any more questions? A moment to load if there are.
Okay.
Well, I think that's all. If you do have any additional questions, please, again, feel free to reach out to any of us. We are happy to answer those. And with that, thank you for joining in, and we look forward to talking to you later.